Those who read this letter will be the most successful people today. I will be the one to provide you with knowledge, experience, and wealth. Most importantly, from this point forward, I will help you memorize the lessons of success in the shortest time possible. Share me with your friends so that together, we can become elite and build lasting wealth. Few people notice this detail. In the glittering theater of the modern economy, we have been conditioned to look for the protagonists of wealth in high-performance sports cars, bespoke suits, and sprawling mansions behind wrought iron gates. Yet the true masters of capital are hiding in plain sight. They are the individuals who mow their own lawns, drive 10-year-old domestic sedans, and live in the same middle-class neighborhoods for 3 decades. This is the staggering, sensational revelation of the millionaire next door, a chronicle of the archetypal invisible wealthy. When Thomas J. Stanley and William D. Danker began their decade-long odyssey into the lives of America's affluent, they expected to find a world of caviar and private jets. Instead, they found a man in a flannel shirt who had never purchased a suit costing more than $400. The narrative begins with a visceral shock to the cultural system. The person you think is a millionaire is often drowning in debt to maintain the appearance of status, while the person you overlook as average is actually the sovereign of a massive, silent fortune. The story ignites with a sensational scene at a high-end penthouse in Manhattan. The researchers had invited a group of decamillionaires, men and women with net worths exceeding $10 million, for a focus group. Seeking to impress these titans, the researchers provided the finest expensive wines and rare pâtés. But as the visible millionaires arrived, a strange friction occurred. These titans of industry, these masters of the market, didn't touch the wine, they asked for crackers and water. They were not the flamboyant spenders depicted in the movies, they were the archetypal frugal stewards. This narrative arc introduces the law of disguised prosperity. It teaches us that wealth is not what you spend, but what you accumulate. The sensational truth is that most people who live in big houses and drive fancy cars are not actually wealthy, they are high-income earners who are hyper-consumers. They are the under-accumulators of wealth, UAWs. Individuals who trade their life energy for symbols of status, leaving their bank accounts hollow. In contrast, the prodigious accumulators of wealth, are those who have mastered the internal discipline of defense. As the narrative flows deeper into the suburban streets of America, we encounter the archetypal contrast between Dr. South and Dr. North. Dr. South is a high-profile lawyer, the sensational image of success. He earns a staggering income, yet his net worth is nearly zero. Every dollar he earns is instantly transmuted into a luxury lease, a country club membership, or a private school tuition. He is a slave to his own lifestyle, forced to work grueling hours just to keep the ghost of poverty from the door. Now, look at Dr. North. He earns significantly less than the lawyer, yet he is a multimillionaire. He lives in a modest ranch-style house, wears off-the-rack clothing, and invests heavily in a diversified portfolio. He is the sovereign of the mundane. The psychological analysis of this stage reveals the myth of income. We are overlookers of the fact that income is the fuel, but net worth is the engine. To grow rich, one must decouple their self-worth from their social status. The poor understands that the sensation of financial independence is infinitely more pleasurable than the fleeting high of a luxury purchase. The narrative intensity builds as the researchers uncovered the secret of the used car. In a society that equates a new vehicle with personal value, the millionaire next door performs a sensational act of rebellion. They buy used. The archetypal millionaire in this study is a man who buys a 2-year-old Ford or Chevy and drives it until the wheels fall off. He views a car as a tool of transportation, not a billboard for his ego. This analyzes the psychology of depreciation. While the UAW loses 20% of their vehicle's value the moment they drive it off the lot, the poor allows the first owner to pay the status tax and then acquires the asset for its true functional value. This is the sensation of efficiency. The wealthy are not lucky, they are disciplined. They realize that the $50,000 saved on a car, when compounded over 20 years, becomes $1 million sanctuary for their retirement. The lesson learned is that frugality is the cornerstone of fortune. To the world, They look boring to the bank. They look like kings. The flow moves into the labyrinth of family dynamics, where we find the sensational danger of economic outpatient care. This is the archetype of the weakened heir. The researchers found that the more financial support a wealthy parent gives to their adult children, the less wealth those children ultimately accumulate. By providing gifts of cash, cars, and down payments, the parents are effectively atrophying the child's financial muscles. The children become UAWs, forever dependent on the parental IV drip of capital. The psychological lesson here is the law of survival. Wealth is a skill that must be forged in the fire of necessity. The most successful children of millionaires are those who never knew their parents were rich until they had already built their own fortunes. They were taught the vibration of labor rather than the expectation of inheritance. The narrative intensity shifts toward the sovereign parent, who realizes that the greatest gift they can give their child is not a check, but the discipline to earn. This leads to the sensational concept of time allocation. The archetypal millionaire spends significantly more time planning their investments and managing their household budget than the average person. They are the ministers of their own treasury, while the UAW spends their time researching the next luxury vacation or the newest electronic gadget. The poor is studying tax laws, researching mutual funds, and tracking their net worth. This analyzes the law of focus. Wealth is the result of energy management. By directing their mental energy toward accumulation rather than consumption, they create a magnetic pull that draws more capital into their lives. The sensation of order in their financial house provides a deep, psychological peace that the chaos of consumption can never offer. They realize that a budget is not a restriction, it is a flight plan to freedom. The narrative script now descends into the mystery of the dull business. We overlook the detail that most millionaires are not tech founders or rock stars, they are owners of unsexy businesses. They are the archetypal blue-collar titans. They own welding shops, junkyards, paving companies, and pest control franchises. They operate in industries with low glamour but high margins and little competition from the status-seeking elite. This is the sensation of niched sovereignty. By dominating a mundane market, they build a fortress of cash flow that is invisible to the public eye. The psychological depth of this stage is the rejection of the spotlight. The millionaire next door doesn't want to be famous, they want to be liquid. They understand that glamour is an expense, while utility is an asset. The lesson learned is the dignity of work. Any business can be a gold mine if it is managed with a certain way of frugality and reinvestment. The momentum carries us toward the battle of the neighborhoods. The researchers discovered that the neighborhood you choose is the single greatest predictor of your consumption habits. This is the archetype of the social anchor. If you move into a neighborhood where everyone drives a Mercedes and belongs to the country club, you will experience a sensational, subconscious pressure to do the same. This is the status trap. The millionaire next door avoids this by living in low-status neighborhoods where they are the big fish in a small pond. By living among people who earn less than they do, they eliminate the need to keep up. The analysis of this stage reveals the law of environmental influence. To grow rich, you must choose an environment that rewards saving rather than spending. The poor is a ghost in the suburbs, living a high net worth life in a low-cost area, allowing the gap between their income and their expenses to widen into a cavern of wealth. The first 10,000 characters of this script have stripped away the mask of affluence. We have moved from the sensation of the Ferrari to the sovereignty of the balance sheet. The seeker has learned that wealth is a humble habit, not a grand event. We have seen that the giant of the millionaire next door is a giant of defense, a master of the budget, and a king of frugality. The air is thick with the realization that anyone can become wealthy if they have the courage to be invisible to society while being invincible in their accounts. The path is set, the research is clear, and the seeker is now ready to descend into the deeper mechanics of asset allocation and the taxation of the rich. The story of getting rich is not a story of buying the world, but of owning yourself. The journey continues, intensifying the dramatic realization that the person standing next to you in the grocery store line, wearing an old watch and driving an old truck, might just be the most powerful person in the room. In the heart of the research, the data screamed a truth that few could accept. 80% of these millionaires were first-generation affluent. They did not inherit their gold, they harvested it from the soil of discipline. They are the living rebuttal to the idea that the system is impenetrable. They show that while a high income makes it easier to accumulate, it is the margin between what is earned and what is consumed that defines the ultimate destiny. The visible millionaire is often a hollow shell, a servant to the bank and the fashion cycle. But the invisible millionaire is free. They are the only ones who can truly walk away because they are the only ones who do not need the world's applause to feel whole. The narrative now shifts to the tactical movements of these individuals, how they shield their harvest from the state and how they select the professionals who guard their sanctuary. The seeker realizes that the science of wealth is actually the art of living below your means. This is the only true security in an uncertain world. The narrative momentum of the invisible wealthy now shifts from the philosophy of the home to the cold, analytical reality of the taxation battlefield. We are overlooking the most important thing: the government only taxes what you realize, not what you accumulate. Imagine the archetype of the tax-efficient alchemist. In the sensational world of the UAW, income is a high-velocity stream that is immediately diverted into the coffers of the state. They earn $1. The government takes 40 cents, and they spend the rest on depreciating liabilities. But the millionaire next door operates with a low-velocity wealth strategy. They own assets that grow silently in the shadows, unrealized capital gains in stocks, private businesses, and real estate, which are not taxed until the moment of sale, which for many is never. This is the sensation of the silent compound. The psychological lesson here is the law of strategic patience. To grow truly rich, one must develop an almost supernatural ability to defer gratification and minimize their taxable footprint. The poor realizes that every dollar paid in taxes is a dollar that cannot work for their family. So they live a life that is income poor but asset rich. As the narrative flows into the labyrinth of the occupational choice, we encounter the sensational truth about self-employment. The researchers found that self-employed people are 4 times more likely to be millionaires than those who work for others. This is the archetype of the risk-mitigating entrepreneur. However, these aren't the high-tech disruptors of Silicon Valley, they are the owners of dull but essential enterprises. The story describes a man who owns a chain of dry cleaners or a company that specializes in asphalt paving. He doesn't have a job title that impresses at a cocktail party, but he has total control over his financial destiny. This analyzes the law of economic independence. While the corporate executive is at the mercy of a board of directors or a merger, the small business owner in a dull industry is protected by the moat of utility. The psychological depth of this stage is the rejection of the prestige trap. The millionaire next door is willing to be socially invisible in exchange for being financially invincible. They understand that the most profitable businesses are often the ones that others are too refined to enter. The narrative intensity builds as the researchers expose the myth of the high-priced advisor. We see the archetype of the sovereign investor. The millionaire next door rarely relies on high-commission brokers or trendy investment schemes. Instead, they are sensational in their self-reliance. They spend hundreds of hours researching their own investments, preferring simple, low-turnover index funds or rock-solid companies they understand. They don't trade, they own. This is the sensation of ownership over speculation. The psychological lesson is the duty of financial self-education. The UAW is often a sophisticated fool, handing their money over to experts who drain their accounts through fees. The poor knows that no one will ever care about their money as much as they do. By becoming their own chief investment officer, they eliminate the leakage of their wealth. The lesson learned is that simplicity is the ultimate sophistication in the world of compounding. The story moves into the sacrifice of the first generation. The researchers found that most millionaires are first-generation wealthy, meaning they started with nothing. This is the archetype of the alchemical founder. These individuals lived in extreme frugality for the first 20 years of their careers, plowing every spare cent back into their businesses or investments. They lived in small houses, drove used cars, and skipped vacations while their peers were living the dream on credit. This is the sensation of the hard launch. The psychological depth of this stage is the tolerance for social friction. To become the millionaire next door, you must be willing to be the odd one out for a long time. You must endure the criticism of the consumer class who cannot understand why you aren't spending your money. The poor realizes that wealth is a marathon, not a sprint. And the early sacrifice is the price of admission for the later freedom. This leads to the sensational concept of selecting the right spouse. Few people notice this detail. But the researchers discovered that it is nearly impossible to become a millionaire next door if your spouse is a hyper-consumer. This is the archetype of the financial soulmate. The most successful poors are married to individuals who are even more frugal than they are. They form a unified front against the pressures of society. They compete with each other to see who can save more, not who can spend more. This analyzes the law of household harmony. Wealth accumulation is a team sport. If one partner is building the asset column while the other is expanding the liability column, the household will remain stagnant. The sensation of shared purpose in a frugal marriage creates a bond that is far stronger than one built on the shared consumption of luxury goods. The lesson learned is that your choice of partner is the most significant financial decision you will ever make. The narrative flow now carries us into the Colosseum of the adult children, where the researchers describe the sensational failure of economic outpatient care once again. We see the archetype of the productive heir versus the passive consumer. The parents who successfully passed on their wealth were those who never let their children know they were rich. They taught their children to be scavengers of opportunity rather than waiters of inheritance. They provided for education and medical care, the human capital assets, but refused to subsidize a lifestyle the child hadn't earned. This is the sensation of the self-made spirit. The psychological analysis reveals the destructive power of the safety net. When a child knows there is a golden parachute waiting for them, they never learn to fly. The poor parent understands that money is a tool, and if given to someone who hasn't learned to use it, it becomes a weapon of self-destruction. The script now descends into the mystery of the targeted marketing. We overlook the detail that the luxury industry is specifically designed to hunt the pseudo-wealthy, the high-income UAWs. The sensational reality is that the truly wealthy are almost impossible to market to because they don't buy things to signal. This is the archetype of the ghost customer. The poor buys quality, durability, and value. They are immune to brand prestige. They will buy a Rolex because it is a precision instrument that lasts a lifetime, not because they want the person in the elevator to see it. In fact, many would prefer to wear a Timex so as not to be noticed. This is the sensation of internal validation. The psychological depth of this stage is the death of the ego. When you no longer need the world to approve of your success, you are finally free to achieve it. The lesson learned is that luxury is a trap for those who are trying to look rich at the expense of being wealthy. The momentum carries us toward the battle of the professional classes. The researchers found that highly educated professionals, doctors, lawyers, and accountants, are the most likely to be under-accumulators of wealth. This is the archetype of the golden handcuff. Because society expects a doctor to live in a certain neighborhood and drive a certain car, the doctor feels a sensational pressure to comply. They spend their human capital to buy social status, leaving them with a negative net worth well into their 50s. The dull business owner, however, has no professional image to maintain. He can be a millionaire in a pair of work boots. This analyzes the law of social expectation. The higher the prestige of your profession, the harder it is to accumulate wealth. The poor is the one who has the courage to be common. They realize that a master's degree in consumption is the fastest way to a life of financial bondage. The second 10,000 characters of this script have revealed the internal fortress of the poor. We have moved from the defense of the home to the offense of the investment. The seeker has learned that wealth is a quiet rebellion against the expectations of a consumer culture. We have seen that the millionaire next door is a master of tax alchemy, a sovereign of dull industries, and a king of human capital. The air is thick with the realization that the giant within the millionaire is not a giant of display, but a giant of discipline. The path is set, the data is undeniable, and the seeker is now ready for the final integration of the legacy and the final meaning of the invisible life. The journey continues, intensifying the dramatic realization that the greatest wealth is not what you can buy, but the freedom you can keep. He who owns his time owns his soul, and the poor owns both because they refuse to trade their autonomy for the fleeting applause of those who do not matter. The final harvest is approaching. And it is a harvest of absolute peace. The final movement of this sociological odyssey brings the seeker to the sanctuary of the sovereign legacy, where the lifelong habit of frugality and defense is revealed to be the foundation of absolute personal liberty. We are overlooking the most important thing. The millionaire next door does not save money because they are cheap, but because they value freedom more than possessions. As the narrative reaches its peak, we see the archetype of the self-actualized steward. This individual has spent 40 years living a quiet, sensational life of discretionary power, while their high-consuming neighbors were working to spend. The millionaire next door was saving to be. By the time they reach their 60s, they possess a fortress of capital that allows them to move through the world with a sense of unshakable security. This is the sensational reward of the long game. The psychological lesson is the law of internalized wealth. True riches are not found in the gleam of the gold, but in the absence of anxiety. And lies the ultimate meaning that the book intends to convey. The Millionaire Next Door is a manifesto for financial individuation through the virtue of frugality. Stanley and Danko's core message is that wealth is what you keep, not what you spend. The book serves as a psychological mirror, forcing the reader to confront their own status-seeking demons and the social pressures that lead to financial ruin. It posits that the American dream has been hijacked by a culture of consumption, and that the only way to reclaim that dream is to return to the ancestral habits of discipline, hard work, and living below one's means. The final lesson is one of radical self-governance. You must choose between looking rich and being wealthy. You cannot have both until you have first secured your independence. The sensational reality is that most people are running a race they cannot win, chasing a finish line that moves every time they get close. The poor simply steps off the track and builds their own stadium. The climax of this journey leads to a state of quiet sovereignty. The seeker moves from the anxiety of the rat race to the poise of the patriarch. They realize that the invisible wealthy are the true engine of the economy, the ones who provide the capital for others' businesses and the stability for their own communities. This is the sensational return to reality. When you no longer need the approval of the crowd, you gain the respect of the self. The final revelation is that the millionaire next door was never about the money itself, it was about the character required to accumulate it. It is the story of a person who decides that their future self is more important than their current ego. The journey ends not with a shopping spree, but with a sense of peace that transcends the material. You are the master of your own sanctuary, and the gold of that sanctuary is the autonomy you have earned through 40 years of saying no to the trivial and saying yes to the vital. Wealth in America is more often the result of a hard-working, ordinary life of discipline than it is the result of a single stroke of luck or genetic genius.